Hi everybody, my name is Fiona and I wanted to give you a little bit of background into what I'm researching so that hopefully you'll choose to fund me. It started out a couple years ago. I was working on my master's degree at the University of Kent at Canterbury, and I wrote my thesis on absinthe. Found out some pretty cool stuff while I was doing that, including a lecture in traditional Chinese medicine where we learned that there are a couple of botanicals that are extremely similar, and you have to be wary of mixing the two of them up. And this caught my attention in relation to absinthe because one of the botanicals that was mentioned is star anise. Latin name for it is Illicium verum. The look-alike plant, its Latin name is Illicium anisatum, and that's actually kind of important. I'll get back to that in a minute. But so I started thinking, well, gee, these two plants look a lot alike. This is obviously an issue because it's still being investigated today. What if, because I know some absinthes use star anise, what if they substituted the Chinese one, which is safe, used in Chinese five spice, excellent, for the Japanese one, which, as it turns out, is actually highly poisonous. And I got to thinking on this, and I'm like, well, I don't really have a time machine. I can't take a gas chromatograph back with me. My chances of finding a pre-banned sample that was made with star anise to begin with, not very likely. And so I started looking into 19th century records, looking at stuff that was exchanged between Japan. There are tariff records saying that star anise was shipped out of Japan. This is interesting because star anise, the Chinese version, isn't actually native to Japan. Only the toxic one is. So it begs the question, what were they actually shipping out? Dig a little deeper. One of the things that really got me excited was looking at an 1888 Encyclopedia Britannica, which was listing Illicium anisatum as one of the ingredients in absinthe. If you'll remember, I said that this was the name for the poisonous one, the Japanese star anise. This is actually really important to note because the two species weren't actually differentiated until 1880. Up until that point, Westerners thought that they were the same plant, and very possibly mixed them up. None of the tariff records that I found actually say what the star anise was being used for, but the fact that they were shipping it out at all is still something to look into. When you start looking at the kanji, which Chinese and Japanese share, there's additional confusion with the names. In kanji, what is known as big fennel in China, that same kanji refers to star anise in Japan, but it doesn't specify which one they're using. They did actually refer to the poisonous one as shikimi, but by that same token, we also have multiple Latin names for the poisonous one. So Illicium religiosum, Illicium anisatum, there's a couple others in there because they really didn't realize that these were two different plants, had troubles differentiating them. We obviously have a timeline for when that differentiation officially happened in the botanical world, but things that happen in the world of botany are generally pretty slow to get around to where everybody else hears about it, knows about it, actually is part of popular culture. Case in point, clear differentiation in 1881, Encyclopedia Britannica in 1888, still using the name for the toxic plant. Getting back to names, botanists are pretty simple people. We're very descriptive. A really good example that I love to use for this is Acer macrophylla. It's a big leaf maple. It's basically saying, yes, it is a maple. What kind of maple? It's a big leaf maple. Ta-da! So this becomes important because when you look at Chinese five spice, you would think that, oh, this tastes like anise. It should be called Illicium anisatum, which the poisonous one was, which means that the poisonous one was the one that was actually described by Linnaeus first, which is why it keeps the name, even though they meant to describe the other plant. Yeah, great how botany works, isn't it? So we've got this botanical confusion going on, and I look at this in the case of absinthe, because when we talk about absinthe, we also start... When we talk about absinthe, we also start talking about absinthism, which is commonly referred to as a fictitious syndrome of the 19th century. They basically say that, and by they, I mean like people in the 19th century said that absinthism was worse than alcoholism, that it had an additional set of characteristics, convulsions, seizures, hallucinations, that regular people who were alcoholics didn't exhibit. Now, today we look back at that and we're like, oh, well, it was just all alcoholism. Well, look at this, maybe not. One of the reasons that absinthism was dismissed so completely was that they couldn't really come up with a cause. So initially we were looking at wormwood, and wormwood was all the thing. If something had wormwood in it, it was banned. Never mind the fact that the toxic compound that's in wormwood, called thuion, isn't actually poisonous enough to do the deed. So, without anything else to blame, they just said, oh, well, it was probably just the alcohol. This kind of sheds new light on it. It presents the possibility that it wasn't thuion and it wasn't wormwood, and it might have been a plant that nobody suspected at all, causing all these symptoms. Now, the reason I say this is because Illicium anisatum, this poisonous Japanese plant, has a compound in it called anisatin. Anisatin is highly, highly toxic. So when you're comparing it to thuion, and again, some big sciencey words here, thuion is a monoterpene. You find it in the essential oil of the plant, and the essential oil of the plant generally evaporates kind of quickly. So depending on when you harvest your wormwood, it might not even have any thuion in it. Also depends on where you're harvesting it from. Even if it does, not all of it even makes it through distillation. And thuion is not a particularly toxic compound. I mean, yes, it's toxic, but we're talking 40 plus milligrams per kilogram. Start doing the math. If an average person weighs about 60 kilograms, how much thuion is it going to take to actually kill the person? Let me answer that for you. It's going to be way more than you will ever find in a bottle of absinthe. You will die of alcohol poisoning long before you die of any sort of thuion toxicity. Flip side, anisatin has an LD50. That's the point where life and death, that 50% rate, meet. An LD50 of about 1 milligram per kilogram. It is a good 40 times more toxic than thuion. And it's not found in the essential oil. It's not as... And unlike thuion, anisatin is a sesquiterpene lactone. I know, big words again, sorry. That also is soluble in alcohol. That means it dissolves in alcohol. So, I started putting my research together, and to give you an idea, this lovely Mead notebook, this is the research that I have been doing. This is on absinthe in general, also includes research on Illicium anisatum and anisatin specifically. But yeah, so I have done a ton of research on this because I wrote my freaking master's thesis on it. But because this was outside of the scope of my master's thesis, I wasn't able to pursue this. I am an alumni of a university that is amazing and offers alumni classes, and through one of these classes I can actually gain access to the lab. Fantastic! I was like, okay, I can do my research. Cool! So I started emailing the professor in charge of this. And I was like, yeah, so I looked up the samples you told me you wanted, and they're really super expensive. To give you an idea, 10 grams of anisatin, which I need as a control. The whole point is to run it through the gas chromatograph at 1 milligram, 2 milligram, 3 milligram, and 4 milligram intervals so that I can track, that rise in the peaks. That adds up to 10 grams. That 10 grams is $700. It's expensive. The actual plant material to distill, several different varieties. So there will be one that's all star anise, one that's all shikimi, and then a couple in the middle, kind of mixing up the ratios. All of that, like the raw materials, and this is just for the Illicium anisatum, is going to cost me over $500. The standardized samples, one of which I will have to use in the gas chromatograph, which will effectively burn it, and one of which I have to keep on file, are $150 for 5 grams. And I need 2. So, science is not cheap. I would really, really appreciate if you guys could help me out. I will happily keep you guys updated as to what I learn. Unfortunately, I can't give you like screenshots of my research or anything because I basically signed a confidentiality agreement on the 19th century documents. But they're out there. I have links to them. I can provide them if necessary, and I can APA cite them. And that's the important part for my, for the research and for writing a journal article and getting it published, which is something I really want to do. One of the other reasons I want to check out a lab and run these tests isn't just to see if the anisatin shows up in the distillation and how much shows up in the distillation to see whether or not it would even be toxic. But I'm also looking at organoleptic characteristics. So organoleptic, that's using your senses. So sight, smell, touch, taste. Ugh, don't want to taste it. It's kind of toxic. But basically say, hey, is anybody going to be able to tell that this absinthe was tainted? One of the other things I'm looking at, and I'm trying to get a hold of the book, which is in German, which I don't speak, is a book that actually goes into great detail about distilling absinthe. And they say that during the distillation process, you commonly have a scent of either cinnamon or cloves. Now, neither of those is actually used in absinthe generally. But, and here's the thing I want you to pay attention to, one of the ways that you can theoretically tell the difference between the Chinese star anise and the Japanese star anise is that toxic Japanese star anise smells faintly of cloves. This is something that I want to look into with greater detail while I'm distilling this. I might not even need to, my little time machine to go back in time, because if I can prove that this other scent is coming from a tainted batch and not a properly prepared batch, that actually lends a lot of credence to my theory. I just gotta find the book that's in German, translate it, find where he's getting his source, and if it's actually a 19th century source, then that kind of validates my point. At least if my lab work also validates it. So, this is really important to me. It's really expensive, and I would really love your help if you guys can manage. $5. $5 a person would even help. 20 would be awesome and amazing. For those who have donated so far, that's Heather, Joe, and Timothy. Thank you so much. I cannot tell you how incredibly excited I was to see your generous donations. It really made me feel really super happy. Thank you. For those of you who are considering donating, obviously if you donate, I'm going to mention you in my acknowledgements of, hey, these people are awesome. They actually supported scientific research that could potentially change, a little bit of history. So, there's that for you. It's not much, but it's what I can do. And I would really appreciate it if you could donate. So, thank you.